On the outskirts of San Francisco, where the fog rolls in thick and dreams often fade like morning dew, an extraordinary tale of love is about to unfold. Marcus Turner, a homeless veteran with calloused hands and an unbreakable spirit, is about to stumble upon a 1967 Ford Mustang GT500, a once magnificent machine now reduced to rust and forgotten promises. What he doesn't know is that this abandoned classic belongs to Rebecca Shaw, a Silicon Valley billionaire who's orchestrated its placement as part of an elaborate search for authentic connection in a world of wealth and pretense. This isn't just another rags to riches story. This is about how one broken car would bridge two broken lives, proving that sometimes the most valuable currency isn't found in bank accounts, but in the way we see the worth in others. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun hadn't yet burned through San Francisco's notorious fog when Marcus Turner emerged from the shelter, his worn military backpack slung over one shoulder. At 52, his face carried the weathered dignity of a man who'd seen both better days and worse nights. The bronze service medal tucked in his pack's inner pocket caught the dim light as he checked its familiar presence. A ritual that anchored him to who he'd been before life had taken its unexpected turns. The shelter's entrance creaked behind him, a sound he'd grown accustomed to over the past 18 months. Sister Margaret's voice carried from within. "Marcus, don't forget the lunch service at noon. We could use those steady hands of yours." He turned, offering a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Wouldn't miss it, sister. Those soup pots don't stir themselves." His voice carried the gravelly warmth of someone who spoke little but meant what he said. The streets of the Tenderloin were quiet at this hour, save for the occasional rumble of early morning delivery trucks. Marcus walked with purpose, his gait steady despite the old knee injury that had ended his military career. He'd learned to work around the pain, just as he'd learned to work around everything else life had thrown his way. Every morning, before heading to Mike's shop, Marcus would stop at the small coffee cart run by an elderly Vietnamese man named Tran. The ritual had started 6 months ago when Marcus had fixed the cart's temperamental generator. Now Tran insisted on giving him a cup of strong black coffee each morning, refusing any payment. "Good morning, my friend," Tran called out as Marcus approached. "The usual?" Marcus nodded, reaching into his pocket out of habit, though he knew Tran would wave away any attempt to pay. As Tran prepared the coffee, Marcus's mind drifted to another morning, 15 years ago, in a different world. He'd been Staff Sergeant Turner then, responsible for maintaining a fleet of military vehicles in Afghanistan. The medal in his pack, the one he touched each morning like a talisman, had come from that time, awarded for saving 3 soldiers from a burning transport after an IED strike. His hands hadn't trembled then, even as he'd worked to free them from the twisted metal. His hands never trembled when working on engines. It was one of the few constants in his life. "You're thinking heavy thoughts today," Tran observed, handing him the steaming cup. The old man's eyes held the knowing look of someone who'd seen his own share of war. "Sometimes the past weighs more than the future." Marcus wrapped his calloused hands around the warm cup. "Sometimes the past is all we've got, Tran. No, my friend, the past is what we build from, not what we live in." Tran gestured to his cart. "Before this, I was a professor in Saigon. Now I serve coffee, but each cup is a new story." As if to punctuate Tran's words, the morning fog began to lift, revealing glimpses of blue sky above the city's towers. Marcus sipped his coffee, letting its warmth chase away the morning chill. He'd head to Mike's shop soon, where honest work and the familiar comfort of tools awaited him. Mike Chen's auto repair was one of the few constants in Marcus's current life. The small shop, wedged between a laundromat and a convenience store, had become something of a sanctuary. Mike never treated him like a charity case, just a skilled mechanic who happened to be down on his luck. "Morning, Mike," Marcus called, out as he approached the already rising garage door. The smell of oil and metal, familiar as an old friend, greeted him. "Marcus, perfect timing. Got a transmission that could use your magic touch." Mike wiped his hands on a red shop rag, his expression brightening. "You still got the steadiest hands I've ever seen work a torque wrench." For the next few hours, Marcus lost himself in the familiar rhythm of mechanical work. His hands remembered what his mind sometimes tried to forget, the precise tension needed for each bolt, the subtle sounds that told him when something wasn't quite right. It was in these moments, surrounded by tools and the honest work of fixing things, that he felt most like himself. By mid-morning, word had spread through the neighborhood about an abandoned car on Evans Avenue. Marcus overheard two of Mike's regular customers discussing it while he worked. "Beautiful machine, just sitting there gathering dust," one said, shaking his head. 1967 Mustang GT500. Criminal to let something like that go to waste. Marcus's hand stilled on the transmission he was repairing. The Mustang had been his dream car since childhood, a symbol of American craftsmanship and the open road. He'd worked on dozens during his service years, learning every curve and quirk of their engineering. Mike noticed his interest. "Why don't you check it out? I can handle things here. Besides," he added with a knowing look, "that car might need someone with your kind of experience." Marcus hesitated, then nodded. Some opportunities weren't meant to be ignored, even if they seemed to come out of nowhere. He cleaned his tools meticulously, a habit the military had ingrained in him, and set out toward Evans Avenue, unaware that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. Rebecca Shaw stood in her penthouse office, staring at the wall of magazine covers that her PR team insisted on displaying. Her own face looked back at her from dozens of glossy surfaces. Forbes, 30 under 30, Tech Innovator of the Year, the woman revolutionizing Silicon Valley. Each cover showed the same carefully crafted image, power suit, confident smile, not a hair out of place. None of them showed the woman who spent her weekends in grease-stained jeans, restoring vintage. Cars in a private garage that even her board of directors didn't know about. She pressed her fingertips against the cool glass of the window, watching the fog roll across the San Francisco Bay. 40 stories below, the city was coming to life. But up here, everything felt removed, sterile. The morning's board meeting had been another exercise in maintaining appearances, nodding at the right moments, making the expected decisions, playing the role of the tech wunderkind who'd turned her college startup into a multi-billion-dollar empire. "Miss Shaw," her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Your 9 a.m. is here." Rebecca smoothed her tailored blazer, an unconscious gesture. "Send them in, Claire." Two men in expensive suits entered, carrying sleek tablets and determined expressions. Investment bankers, eager to discuss another merger opportunity. She could recite their pitch before they opened their mouths. "Gentlemen," she greeted them with practiced warmth, "please have a seat." As they launched into their presentation, Rebecca's mind drifted to the Mustang she'd left on Evans Avenue 3 days ago. The car had been her father's pride and joy, the one thing he'd refused to sell when his own company had gone under. She'd spent countless Saturdays watching him work on it, learning the difference between a carburetor and a camshaft, understanding that some things were worth more than their market value. "Miss Shaw?" One of the bankers was looking at her expectantly. "Please continue," she said smoothly, though she hadn't heard a word. "I'm particularly interested in how you see this benefiting our core user base." The meeting dragged on. Slides, filled with graphs and projections floating past her eyes. When they finally left, Rebecca walked to her private bathroom and stared at her reflection. The woman in the mirror was a perfect construction, every detail calculated to inspire confidence in investors and admiration in the press. She opened her phone's hidden folder, checking the surveillance feed from Evans Avenue. The Mustang sat where she'd left it, a silent test waiting for the right person. Her father would have called it crazy, leaving a classic car in one of the city's rougher neighborhoods. But she'd done her research. The community there had its own code of honor, and she'd made arrangements with local businesses to keep an eye on things. "Claire," she called through the intercom, "clear my afternoon schedule." "But Ms. Shaw, the investor calls." "Reschedule them. Something's come up." Rebecca was already changing into the clothes she kept in her private closet. Worn jeans, a simple blouse, comfortable boots. The transformation wasn't just physical. She could feel herself becoming more real with each discarded piece of her corporate armor. The private elevator took her to the underground garage where her everyday car waited, a modest hybrid that wouldn't draw attention. As she drove toward Evans Avenue, taking a circuitous route out of habit, she thought about what her board would say if they knew their CEO was orchestrating an elaborate scheme just to find someone genuine in a world of carefully crafted images. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Becky, you can't fix every broken thing you find." She'd been 12, trying to rescue a damaged bird. "Sometimes," he'd said, "you have to let things find their own way to heal." But she'd always been stubborn. The bird had survived, just like she had survived when everyone said a 22-year-old couldn't run a tech company. Just like her father's Mustang had survived years in storage after his death, waiting for the right moment, the right person. Rebecca parked several blocks away from Evans Avenue, her heart quickening as she checked the surveillance feed. More time. A figure was approaching the car, a tall man with military bearing, moving with purpose despite a slight limp. She watched him circle the Mustang slowly, his hands hovering over the rusted body with something like reverence. For a moment, she felt a twinge of guilt about the manipulation, but sometimes, she told herself, the most honest connections started with a careful lie. She watched the man examine the car, and for the first time in years, she felt something real stir beneath her carefully constructed facade. The Mustang sat like a sleeping giant in the weak sunlight, its faded Highland green paint telling stories of better days. Marcus approached slowly, his experienced eyes taking in every detail, despite the rust patches blooming along the wheel. Wells and the sagging rear quarter panel, he could see the bones of greatness beneath the decay. His hand reached instinctively for the socket wrench set in his backpack, the same set he'd carried through 3 tours of duty. "You've seen better days, haven't you, girl?" he murmured, running calloused fingers along the car's surface. The metal felt cool under his touch, familiar somehow, like greeting an old friend who'd fallen on hard times. The socket wrench set had been a gift from his first commanding officer. "A mechanic's only as good as his tools, Turner," the man had said. Now, pulling out the worn leather tool roll, Marcus felt that same sense of purpose that had guided him through countless repairs. In the motor pool, he started with the hood, working the stuck latch carefully. Years of neglect had seized it shut, but Marcus knew the secret language of stubborn machinery. A gentle push here, a careful lift there, the hood groaned in protest but finally yielded. The engine compartment told its own story. The original 428 Cobra jet engine was intact, though years of exposure had left it in need of serious attention. Marcus leaned in closer, his trained eye catching details others might miss. The serial numbers matched the body. This wasn't just any Mustang, but a genuine GT500, numbers matching. In the collector world, it would be worth a fortune if restored properly. "Thought you might show up," a voice said behind him. Marcus turned to find an elderly man watching from the sidewalk. The man introduced himself as Joe, owner of the corner store that had kept watch over the Mustang. "Been here 3 days now," Joe continued. "Folks been talking, but you're the first one who's looked at her right, like she's worth saving, not just worth something." Marcus nodded, understanding the distinction. "Any idea who owns her?" Joe shrugged, but something in his expression suggested he knew more than he was saying. "Nobody's claimed her. Shame to see her wasting away like this." Marcus turned back to the engine, his hands already itching to begin work. The toolkit felt heavy in his pack, not just with the weight of metal, but with possibility. He'd learned long ago that having the right tools meant having the power to fix what was broken, to make things whole again. A quick inventory revealed the major issues: seized engine, rotted fuel lines, extensive rust damage. But the frame was solid, and the interior, though weathered, was complete. It would take time, resources he didn't have, but the potential was there. "You know something about these old cars?" Joe asked, watching Marcus's methodical examination. "Worked on plenty during my service years. This model—" Marcus's voice caught slightly. "This was the one we all dreamed about getting our hands on." He pulled out his socket wrench, the metal worn smooth from years of use. The 9/16 socket fit perfectly on the valve cover bolt. With careful pressure, it turned, not seized, just stuck. Something in Marcus's chest loosened at the small victory. A light drizzle began to fall, beading on the car's surface. Marcus didn't notice, lost in the familiar rhythm of basic diagnostics. Each component he checked told part of the story. The transmission that would need rebuilding, the brake lines that would have to be replaced, the electrical system that would require a complete overhaul. But underneath it all was something solid, something true, like the socket wrench set that had seen him through war zones and peace, through triumph and loss. This car had an underlying integrity that no amount of neglect could erase. Hours passed, unnoticed. The drizzle came and went. Joe brought him coffee at some point, watching with quiet approval as Marcus documented each issue in a small notebook he carried. In the distance, a figure observed through the window of a parked hybrid, her presence unnoticed but deliberate. As the day's light began to fade, Marcus reluctantly packed away his tools. Each wrench went back in its proper place in the roll, a habit drilled into him by years of military discipline. He'd identified the major problems, mapped out what would need to be done. Now came the hard part, figuring out how to do it with no garage, no money, and no claim to the vehicle. But as he took one last look at the Mustang, something told him this wasn't the end of the story. The old socket wrench set had never led him wrong before. Like the service medal in his pack, it was a reminder of who he was, what he could do. And something about this car, this moment, felt like more than chance. "You'll be back tomorrow?" Joe asked, though it wasn't really a question. Marcus nodded, already planning what tools he'd need. Someone needs to look after her. As he walked away, the weight of the tool roll felt different somehow. Not like a burden of the past, but like a key to the future. Behind him, the Mustang sat in gathering darkness, its secrets still untold, waiting for hands that knew how to speak its language. Marcus sat on an overturned milk crate beside the Mustang, a worn composition notebook open on his knee. The morning sun cast long shadows across the page as he made careful notes, his handwriting precise and methodical, a habit from his military. Days of maintaining service records. Day 1 assessment, he wrote. 1967 Mustang GT500, matching numbers. Engine 428 Cobra jet, seized but salvageable. Transmission needs complete rebuild. Rust damage extensive but frame solid. Interior complete but weathered. He paused, pen hovering over the paper. Below the technical observations, he added, "Something about this car feels different, like it's been waiting." The notebook had been Sister Margaret's idea. She'd handed it to him that morning at breakfast, noting how he'd come alive, talking about the Mustang he'd found. "Document your journey," she'd said. "Sometimes the real restoration happens in the telling of it." A delivery man from the corner store walked by, leaving a cardboard box near the car. Inside, Marcus found basic cleaning supplies and a set of shop rags. He looked toward Joe's store, but the old man was deliberately busy with a customer, avoiding his gaze. Marcus picked up a shop rag, its fresh cotton smell mixing with the metallic tang of the morning air. In his notebook he wrote, "Community starting to help. Don't know why, don't know if I deserve it." hours melted away as he began the careful process of cleaning decades of grime from the engine compartment. Each component revealed new challenges, new stories. He documented everything, the way the distributor cap had cracked in a distinctive pattern suggesting heat damage, how the rubber hoses had hardened to near petrification, the strange marking on the firewall that looked like someone's initials. "Found RS carved near the master cylinder," he wrote. "Wonder what story that holds." Around noon, a young boy from the neighborhood approached, watching Marcus work with unconcealed fascination. Instead of shooing him away, Marcus found himself explaining each step, each discovery. The boy's questions were sharp, interested. "You think it'll run again?" the boy asked. Marcus looked up from his notebook, where he'd been sketching a diagram of the fuel system. "Everything can run again with enough care and the right knowledge. Here, let me show you something." He taught the boy how to check for structural integrity by tapping the metal, listening for the change in tone that indicated hidden rust. The lesson found its way into his notes, teaching Tommy about rust assessment. "Kid has good ears. Maybe that's what this is about, passing on what we know." As the day progressed, more neighbors stopped by. An elderly woman brought sandwiches. A teenager offered to help clean the interior. Marcus documented each interaction, each small kindness, alongside his technical observations. The journal was becoming more than a repair log. It was the story of how one broken car could pull a community together. Late afternoon brought an unexpected discovery. Tucked under the passenger seat, Marcus found an old maintenance log, its pages yellow with age. The last entry was dated 15 years ago, signed with the same initials he'd found on the firewall, RS. In his notebook, he wrote, "Found original maintenance log. Owner took incredible care of this car. Each repair documented with precision and..." He paused, searching for the right word. "Love. Can feel it in the attention to detail. Whatever happened to make them abandon this car, it wasn't for lack of caring." The sun was setting when Joe finally walked over, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He glanced at the notebook in Marcus's hands. "Keeping track." Marcus nodded. "Never know when small details might matter." Joe smiled knowingly. "Or maybe writing it down makes it more real, gives it purpose." Marcus looked at the pages he'd filled, technical drawings mixed with personal observations, repair notes, alongside reflections on community and connection. He thought about his service medal, about how sometimes the most important things we carry aren't the most valuable ones. "Tomorrow I'll start on the electrical system," he wrote, as Joe headed back to his store. "But maybe what's really being rewired here isn't just the car." He closed the notebook carefully, tucking it into his backpack next to his tool roll. The Mustang loomed in the gathering darkness, its presence somehow larger than just metal and machinery. In his notes, he documented every flaw, every challenge, but also every possibility, every small victory. The journal was becoming a record not just of a car's resurrection, but of his own. The Evans Avenue Chronicle wasn't much of a newspaper, more of a neighborhood bulletin, printed on yellow paper and distributed through local shops. But when Marcus saw the headline, "Mystery Mustang Brings Hope to Evans Avenue," something caught in his throat. The article was simple, written by Joe's granddaughter, who was studying journalism at City College. "In a time when most people walk past problems, one man has chosen to stop. For the past week, a homeless veteran known only as Marcus has been restoring an abandoned Mustang GT500, drawing our community together in unexpected ways." He folded the paper carefully, tucking it into his journal. The attention made him uncomfortable, but he couldn't deny how things had changed in the past week. The suspicious glances had turned to greetings. The wide berth people gave him had narrowed to friendly nods and offers of help. "You're famous now," Tommy said, appearing at his elbow with a box of donuts from his mother's bakery. The boy had become a regular fixture, spending his after-school hours learning about engines and sharing neighborhood gossip. "Not looking for fame, kid," Marcus replied, but he accepted a donut. Just trying to do right by this car. More supplies had appeared mysteriously over the past few days. A professional creeper to help him work under the car, fresh sets of gaskets, even a small generator to power the work lights as days grew shorter. He never saw who left them, but each morning something new waited by the car. Mike, from the auto shop, had started stopping by after closing his business, bringing specialty tools and decades of experience. "Consider it payment for all the transmissions you've fixed," he'd said when Marcus tried to protest. The article had mentioned Marcus's military background, and that morning, a Vietnam veteran named Carl had shown up with 2 folding chairs and a coffee and a thermos. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sunrise paint the Mustang's curves in gold. "Sometimes the only way to heal is to fix something else," Carl had said quietly, and Marcus understood it wasn't just about the car. By mid-afternoon, a small crowd had gathered to watch Marcus work on the electrical system. He found himself explaining each step, surprised by how easily the teaching came. A retired electrician in the crowd offered suggestions about modernizing the wiring while keeping the original character. "You should document this," someone said. "Could help other people restore their cars." Marcus glanced at the newspaper article, thinking about how words could connect people, create understanding. The story had mentioned his homelessness, not with pity, but with respect, focusing on his skills and determination rather than his circumstances. Joe appeared with his usual impeccable timing, carrying a cardboard box. "Found these in storage," he said, setting down a collection of original Mustang manuals and parts catalogs. "Figured they'd be more use out here." Marcus opened one of the manuals, its pages crisp despite their age. The diagrams were familiar. He'd memorized them during his service years, but having the original documentation felt significant, like being entrusted with something precious. A light rain began to fall, and without discussion, the neighbors moved to help cover the car and tools. Someone produced a tarp, another person brought rope. The coordination was smooth, natural, as if they'd been doing this together for years, instead of days. Later, as the street grew quiet, Marcus reread the article. The reporter had captured something he hadn't fully realized. This wasn't just about restoring a car. It was about how one act of care could ripple outward, touching lives in unexpected ways. He thought about the mysterious supplies, the growing circle of helpers, the way people now greeted him by name. The newspaper article had given their impromptu community a voice, making visible the invisible threads that were binding them together. From her hidden vantage point, Rebecca watched the day's events unfold, her heart both warmed and troubled by what she'd set in motion. The article sat folded in her lap, its simple words carrying more truth than any glossy magazine cover ever had. The original Ford Mustang manual lay open on Marcus's workbench, its pages worn soft with age and use. His fingers traced the familiar diagrams of the 428 Cobra jet engine, memories flooding back of hours spent studying similar pages in military motor pools across 3 continents. But this manual was different. Its margins filled with handwritten notes, each annotation revealing the care and attention of the mysterious RS. "See how they modified the timing?" Marcus explained to Tommy, who had become his regular assistant. "Whoever owned this car knew exactly what they were doing. These notes, they're like a conversation across time." The manual had become more than just a reference. It was a bridge between past and present, between the car's previous owner and its current caretaker. Each page revealed new secrets, precise measurements, performance modifications, maintenance schedules maintained with religious devotion. "Look here," Marcus pointed to a notation dated 15 years ago. "They adjusted the carburetor to optimize for high-altitude performance. That's not something an amateur would know to do." Mike leaned over, whistling softly. "Those are some serious modifications. This wasn't just a show car. It was built to perform." The engine block hung suspended from a chain hoist, decades of grime slowly giving way to Marcus's patient cleaning. Each component told its own story, wear patterns that spoke of high-speed runs, maintenance marks that showed meticulous care, subtle modifications that only a true enthusiast would recognize. As Marcus worked, he found himself responding to the notes in the manual, adding his own observations beneath the faded ink of RS. It felt like a conversation across years, two mechanics separated by time, but united in their respect for the machine. The timing chains shot, he wrote, but the cam lobes show minimal wear. Previous owners' attention to oil changes saved this engine. The growing crowd of regular onlookers had begun bringing chairs, turning the sidewalk into an impromptu classroom. Marcus found himself teaching not just about mechanics, but about patience, attention to detail, the meditation of careful work. Every engine has a rhythm, he explained, demonstrating how to check valve clearances. You have to listen, feel it. The manual gives you the numbers, but your hands tell you the truth. A veterans organization had heard about the project and donated a professional tool chest. Marcus arranged his tools with military precision, each one ready for its purpose. But it was the manual he returned to again and again, studying the previous owner's notes like a scholar poring over ancient texts. They balanced the rotating assembly, he murmured, reading a detailed entry. Custom ground the crank. This wasn't just maintenance. This was love. In the distance, Rebecca watched through binoculars, her heart racing as Marcus discovered each modification she and her father had made. She remembered holding the flashlight as her father worked, his patient explanations of each adjustment, each improvement. The manual had been their shared journal, a record of countless Saturday afternoons spent together. As the day wore on, Marcus began the delicate process of rebuilding the engine's bottom end. Each movement was precise, measured, guided by both the manual specifications and the whispered wisdom of its handwritten notes. The clearances have to be perfect, he told his attentive audience. There's no room for good enough in an engine like this. The sun was setting when he made another discovery. A small photo tucked between the manual's pages, faded but clear enough to show a young girl perched on the Mustang's fender, beaming beside a man in coveralls. Marcus studied it briefly before, carefully placing it back, respecting the privacy of these glimpses into the past. In her car, Rebecca touched her own copy of that photo, remembering the smell of engine oil and the sound of her father's laugh. The manual had been his gift to her on her 16th birthday, along with the promise to teach her everything he knew. As darkness fell, Marcus wrapped up his work, carefully covering the engine and securing his tools. The manual went into his backpack, precious as any military document he'd ever carried. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, but for now he had the satisfaction of work well done and mysteries slowly unfolding. The Bell's Corner Diner wasn't much to look at, just another weathered storefront along Evans Avenue, but it had become Marcus's unofficial headquarters. Each morning, he'd settle into the corner booth, spreading the Mustang's manual beside. A cup of coffee that Emma, the owner, insisted was on the house for anyone bringing this much life back to our street. This morning, however, his usual booth was occupied. A woman sat there, her simple clothes and lack of jewelry at odds with her precise posture. She was studying the Mustang through the window with an intensity that made Marcus pause. "Sorry. About your spot," Emma called from behind the counter. "But maybe you two should talk. She's been asking about the car." Marcus hesitated, then approached the booth. The woman looked up, and for a moment something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or anticipation. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "I'm Marcus." "Rebecca," she replied, gesturing to the empty seat. Her coffee cup sat untouched, a lipstick mark on its rim, the only sign she'd even tried it. "I've been watching your work on the Mustang. You know, your way around classic cars." There was something in her voice, a knowledge that went beyond casual interest. Marcus studied her as he sat down, noting the slight grease stain on her sleeve that most people wouldn't notice, the way her eyes kept returning to the car with an almost painful longing. "Emma, could I get a coffee?" he called. The familiar, Ceramic mug appeared quickly, Emma's knowing smile suggesting she'd been waiting for this moment. Cream, sugar, Rebecca asked, finally sipping from her own cup. Black, Marcus replied. Like engine oil, my sergeant used to say. A genuine smile touched her lips. My father said the same thing. She paused, then added softly, he taught me everything I know about cars. The morning crowd filtered in and out of the diner, but Marcus and Rebecca remained deep in conversation. She knew things about Mustangs that weren't in any manual, spoke about engines with the intimacy of someone who'd grown up around them. The 67 GT500's carburetor has a specific sweet spot, she was saying, sketching on a napkin. If you adjust the float level just a hair above spec, you get better fuel delivery at high RPM. Marcus finished, stunned. It was exactly what the manual's marginalia had suggested. He looked at her sharply, but she was already moving on, discussing the custom headers she'd once installed on a similar model. Emma kept their cups full, each refill coming with a small, knowing smile. The diner's coffee cups weren't anything special, thick ceramic with a faded blue stripe, but somehow this one felt significant, marking the moment everything began to shift. You should come see the engine, Marcus found himself saying. I could use another set of experienced eyes. Rebecca's expression flickered. Hesitation, eagerness, something else he couldn't quite read. I'd like that, she said finally. But not today, soon. As she stood to leave, she placed a folded bill under her coffee cup. For Emma, she said, then paused. You're doing good work, Marcus. Not everyone would see the worth in something others had thrown away. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Marcus watched her walk away, noting how she circled the Mustang once before disappearing around the corner. Emma appeared with the coffee pot. Interesting woman, she said, topping off his cup. Been coming in for a week now. Always your booth. Always watching the car. Marcus picked up the cup, thinking about Rebecca's precise knowledge. The pain in her eyes when she looked at the Mustang. The way she'd drawn that carburetor modification perfectly. You ever get the feeling, he asked Emma, that there's more to a story than what you're seeing? Emma set the coffee pot down and pulled out the bill Rebecca had left, $100 for a $2 cup of coffee. Honey, she said, in all my years running this diner, that's the only kind of story worth telling. Through the window, the Mustang caught the morning sun, its slowly emerging beauty drawing more than just casual glances from passers-by. Marcus touched the manual in his pack, thinking about the handwritten notes, the initials RS, and the woman who knew exactly how to modify a GT500's carburetor. The note appeared early Monday morning, tucked under one of the Mustang's windshield wipers. The paper was expensive, the kind used for formal business correspondence, but the handwriting was informal, almost intimate. Thank you for seeing the beauty others missed, for understanding that some things are worth saving, not because of what they're worth, but because of what they mean. The parts you need are in the trunk. Marcus read the note 3 times before walking to the trunk. The key was in the lock, though he was certain it hadn't been there the night before. Inside, he found exactly what the engine needed. High-performance parts, still in their original packaging, each one exactly matching the specifications in the manual's marginalia. Someone's watching out for you, Joe said, appearing with his usual perfect timing and 2 cups of coffee. Question is, why? Marcus handed him the note. Met a woman at the diner yesterday. Rebecca. She knew things about this car, things only someone intimate with it would know. Joe studied the note, his expression carefully neutral. Lot of people named R in this city. Not a lot who'd know. Exactly what parts this engine needs. Marcus picked up a custom-machined camshaft, admiring its precision. Or who could afford parts like these? The morning crowd began gathering. The regulars who'd been following the restoration's progress. Tommy arrived with his backpack full of homework, settling into his usual spot where he could watch and study at the same time. Found something else, Marcus said quietly to Joe, pulling the manual from his pack. Remember those initials I mentioned? RS? He opened to a specific page, pointing to a detailed note about the camshaft specifications. These new parts match these modifications exactly. Joe took a long sip of coffee. Sometimes, he said carefully, people leave things behind for a reason, and sometimes they find ways to come back to them. The morning progressed, but Marcus's mind kept returning to the note, to Rebecca in the diner, to all the small mysteries that seemed to be converging. As he installed the new parts, he found himself working with extra care, aware that someone who truly understood the work was watching. Around noon, a sleek hybrid parked across the street. Rebecca emerged, dressed, casually again, but with that same subtle contradiction between her clothes and her bearing. She approached slowly, her eyes taking in the progress since their last encounter. "The new parts working out?" she asked, then caught herself, a flicker of something, worry, regret, crossing her face. Marcus straightened up from the engine. "Obey," wiping his hands on a shop rag. "You tell me," he said quietly. "Ah!" The silence between them was heavy with unspoken questions. Rebecca touched the car's fender gently, like greeting an old friend. "My father's name was Robert Shaw," she said finally. "R.S. He taught me everything I know about cars, about life, really. This was his pride and joy. Was? He died 15 years ago, the same day I took over his company." She smiled sadly. "The same day I parked this car and couldn't bring myself to touch it again." Tommy appeared with a textbook question, hesitating when he saw the tension in the air. Rebecca's face softened as she looked at the boy. "Homework?" she asked. When he nodded, she smiled. "You know, my father always said you could learn everything about life from working on cars. Physics, mathematics, patience, pride in doing things. Right?" Marcus watched them, seeing how naturally she fell into the role of teacher, how her carefully maintained facade cracked just a little when she talked about engines and learning. The note crinkled in his pocket, a bridge between her two worlds, between who she was and who she had to be. He understood something about masks, about the weight of expectations, about the parts of ourselves we keep hidden until we find someone who might understand them. "The cam timing will need adjusting," he said, offering her a wrench. "Want to show Tommy how it's done?" Their eyes met over the engine bay, and something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of shared understanding, of mysteries still unfolding, of connections deeper than either had expected to find. Rebecca arrived the next morning carrying a worn leather photo album, its edges softened by years of handling. She found Marcus already at work, his movements precise as he adjusted the newly installed camshaft. Without a word, she set the album on the workbench and picked up a torque wrench, falling into sync with his rhythm. 15 degrees? She asked, referencing the cam timing. "Your father's note suggested 16, Marcus replied. "Said it smoothed out the power curve." They worked in comfortable silence, their hands speaking a shared language of mechanical expertise. Only when the adjustment was complete did Rebecca open the album. "I thought you should see these," she said, her voice soft with memory, "to understand what this car means." The first photo showed the Mustang in its prime, Highland green paint gleaming in summer sunlight, Robert Shaw leaning against the fender with a young Rebecca perched on his shoulders. Both were laughing, covered in grease smudges and radiating joy. "First time we rebuilt the carburetor," Rebecca explained. "I was 7. Dad said if I was going to learn, I should start with the heart of the fuel system." Page after page told the story. Rebecca growing up alongside the car, each photo documenting another repair, another improvement, another shared moment. Her father's pride was evident in every image, matched by her growing confidence around engines and tools. "Here," she pointed to a photo of herself at 16, holding up a timing light. "Dad insisted on teaching proper diagnostic techniques before letting me make any modifications. Said understanding the baseline was crucial before making improvements." Marcus studied each image carefully, seeing the connections between the manual's notes and the documented changes. "The headers you installed," he said, pointing to one photo. "That's when you made the carburetor adjustments we discussed." "You really did study those notes," Rebecca said, something like wonder in her voice. "They're a testament to knowledge, to caring about doing things right." Marcus gestured to the engine bay. "Everything I've found while working on this car shows the same attention to detail, the same respect for the machine." A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the photos. Tommy leaned in, fascinated by the documented history of the car he'd been helping to restore. Rebecca found herself sharing stories, explaining modifications, the carefully maintained facade of the wealthy CEO falling away in the face of genuine enthusiasm. "Miss Rebecca knows her stuff," Tommy announced to the group. "She explained them, firing order better than my science teacher explains anything." The comment drew laughs, but Marcus caught the flash of pleasure in Rebecca's eyes. Here, among people who cared about the work itself, she didn't have to maintain any pretense. They spent the morning switching between work and memories, the album serving as both technical reference and story guide. Rebecca's knowledge was comprehensive, but it was her evident love for the work that struck Marcus most deeply. "Dad always said there were two kinds of people," she mused, helping him adjust a valve cover. "Those who see cars as status symbols, and those who understand they're really about connection, to memory, to craft, to the people we share them with." "He sounds like a wise man," Marcus said softly. "He would have liked you," Rebecca replied, then quickly busied herself with the torque wrench, but not before Marcus caught the hint of color in her cheeks. The album's final photo showed Robert Shaw standing proudly beside the fully restored Mustang, arm around a teenage Rebecca. Date on the back was just weeks before his death. "This was his legacy to me," Rebecca said, touching the image gently. "Not the company, not the money. This car and everything he taught me while working on it. I thought I had to choose between his worlds, the business empire and the garage. Maybe I was wrong." Marcus looked at her, grease-stained and completely at ease despite her obvious wealth and power. "Maybe there's no choice needed. Maybe it's about being true to all the parts of who you are." Their eyes met over the album, and something shifted in the air between them. Rebecca's hand moved slightly, almost touching his butt, not quite. The moment hung there, full of possibility. Then Tommy dropped a wrench, the clang breaking the spell. They returned to work, but something had changed. A deeper understanding, a growing trust, a recognition of kindred spirits who spoke the same language of metal and memory. The newspaper clipping fell from between the Mustang's sun visor and headliner while Marcus was cleaning the interior. Yellow with age, its headline still clear. "Tech pioneer Robert Shaw dies in crash. Daughter takes helm at Shaw Industries." Below was a photo of a younger Rebecca in corporate attire, her face a mask of controlled grief as she addressed reporters. Marcus read it twice, pieces clicking into place. Shaw Industries, the tech giant that had transformed Silicon Valley. He'd walked past their gleaming headquarters many times during his homeless wanderings, never imagining a connection to this car, to Rebecca. The article painted a picture of tragedy and triumph. Robert Shaw, brilliant engineer turned tech visionary, dead at 48. His 22-year-old daughter stepping up to lead the company through its crucial public offering. The stock price mentioned made Marcus's head spin. "I wondered when you'd find that." Rebecca's voice came from behind him. She stood in the shadow of the car, looking smaller somehow, more vulnerable. "I put it there the day I parked her. Hadn't been able to look at it since." Marcus held out the clipping, but she shook her head. "Dad was testing a new autonomous driving system," she continued, running her hand along the Mustang's fender. "The irony, right? Man who loved driving, killed by a computer trying to do it for him. The company," Marcus started, "is worth billions now. We perfected the technology, made it safer." Her laugh was hollow. "I threw myself into the corporate world, became what everyone expected. The grieving daughter proving herself worthy of her father's legacy." She gestured at the Mustang, But his real legacy was here, in grease and steel, and teaching his daughter that anything broken can be fixed if you care enough. Marcus looked at the article again, at the young woman trying so hard to look strong. That's why you left the car here. To find someone who'd understand. To find someone who'd see what Dad saw, the beauty in bringing something back to life. She met his eyes. I didn't expect to find someone who'd understand both the car and the weight of expectations, Marcus offered. The masks we wear? She nodded, relief crossing her features at being understood. The evening light cast long shadows through the Mustang's windows, painting patterns across their faces. When I first came home from the service, Marcus said quietly, I couldn't adjust. Everyone expected the same person who'd left, but war changes you, fixes some things, breaks others. I ended up on the streets because it was easier than trying to be who I used to be. Rebecca moved closer, her shoulder nearly touching his as they leaned against the car. And now I'm learning that who I am is more than who I was. Every time I fix something on this car, I feel more like myself. He smiled slightly. The self I choose to be, not the one others expect. The newspaper clipping lay between them on the car's hood, a bridge between their worlds. The corporate photo showed nothing of the woman who could spend hours adjusting valve clearances, whose eyes lit up explaining engine dynamics to a curious kid. From his regular spot, Tommy watched them, homework forgotten. Are you really a CEO? He called out. Because you've got grease under your nails. Rebecca laughed. A genuine sound that seemed to surprise her. Right now I'm just someone helping fix a car. Sometimes that's enough. But Marcus saw the shadow cross her face, knew she was thinking about board meetings, investor expectations, the weight of running a company her father had built. The article mentioned shareholders, stock prices, corporate responsibility, a world as far from Evans Avenue as possible. It's not about choosing one world or the other, he said, echoing their earlier conversation. It's about being honest about who you are in both. She picked up the article finally, fingers tracing her father's photo. He used to say that about the Mustang. It could be elegant or powerful, refined or raw, depending on what was needed. But underneath, it was always true to itself. The sun was setting, turning the car's paint to liquid gold. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more complications. But for now, they stood in comfortable silence, two people finding their truth, in the shadow of a car that had brought them together. The business card caught the morning light, its embossed letters gleaming. Rebecca Shaw, CEO, Shaw Industries. It lay torn in half on the Mustang's workbench, split between her corporate title and the handwritten note on the back. Meet me at the diner, R. Marcus stared at the torn card, while the morning news played from a neighbor's radio. Tech giant Shaw Industries faces scrutiny as CEO Rebecca Shaw's unusual behavior raises investor concerns. Sources say the billionaire executive has been spotted in the city's rougher neighborhoods, wearing casual clothes and working on cars. The diner was empty, except for Emma and a cluster of reporters outside, their cameras pointed through the windows. Rebecca sat in their usual booth, her corporate armor back in place, tailored suit, perfect hair, careful mask. I'm sorry, she said as Marcus slid into the seat across from her. I never meant for this to happen. The reporters followed you? A board member saw me here yesterday. They think I'm having some kind of breakdown. Her laugh was bitter. Apparently CEOs aren't supposed to get their hands dirty. Emma appeared with their coffee, positioning herself to block the photographer's view. Vultures, she muttered. Been chasing folks away all morning? Through the window they could see Joe shooing reporters away from the Mustang. Tommy stood guard nearby, his young face uncharacteristically stern as he protected their workspace. The board called an emergency meeting, Rebecca continued, her voice tight. They're concerned about the company's image, about stability. $22 billion in market value doesn't mix well with grease stains and homeless veterans, apparently. The words hung between them, sharper than she'd intended. Marcus watched her fingers trace the rim of her coffee cup, leaving elegant fingerprints on the ceramic. "I need to know," he said quietly. "Was any of this real, or was I just part of some elaborate escape from your corporate life? That's not fair." Rebecca's composure cracked. "Everything about this, about the car, about you, it's the most real thing in my life. But I have responsibilities. Thousands of employees, shareholders, and I'm a liability." Marcus's voice was level, but his hands had stilled on his coffee cup. "A PR problem." "No!" Her vehemence drew looks from the reporters outside. More quietly, she continued, "You're the first person since Dad who understands both the machine and the meaning, who sees me, not my title. But you can't be both people, can you? The CEO and the mechanic's daughter." Rebecca pulled something from her bag, the torn pieces of her business card. "I've spent 15 years trying to be what everyone expected. The perfect CEO, the legacy holder, the tech visionary. But working on the Mustang, being here," she gestured around the diner, at the community they'd become part of. "For the first time, I remember who I really am." "And who is that?" Marcus asked softly. Before she could answer, the diner's door chimed. A man in an expensive suit entered, his disapproving gaze taking in the scene. "Rebecca, the board is waiting." His tone made it clear this wasn't a request. She stood, corporate mask sliding back into place, but her hands shook slightly as she gathered her things, and Marcus saw what it cost her to maintain the facade. "I have to go," she said. "I have to try to explain, to make them understand that some things are worth more than market value." Marcus's question was gentle but pointed. Rebecca touched the torn business card one last time before leaving. It on the table, outside a sleek corporate car waited to whisk her back to her other life. Marcus watched her go, then picked up the torn card. On one half, the corporate logo and title gleamed. On the other, her handwritten note spoke of a simpler truth. Two worlds, torn apart like the card itself. Emma appeared with fresh coffee. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "sometimes things have to break apart before they can be rebuilt stronger." Through the window, the Mustang waited, its restoration paused at a crucial moment, like its owner, caught between what was expected and what was true. The half-finished stack of restoration photos sat on Marcus's workbench, documenting progress that had suddenly stopped. The latest image showed the Mustang's engine bay, partially restored but incomplete. Timing belt mid-installation, vacuum, lines waiting to be connected, careful labels marking next steps that hadn't been taken. 3 days had passed since Rebecca's departure. 3 days of media vans circling Evans Avenue like vultures, of Tommy standing guard with fierce loyalty, of Joe and Emma running interference with reporters who thought they'd found a scandal in the making. Marcus worked methodically, despite the attention, but the silence felt wrong. No more technical discussions, no shared memories, no quiet moments of understanding over coffee. He'd taken to documenting everything with his phone's camera, as if preserving evidence that it had all been real. "Shaw Industries stock stabilizes as CEO addresses board concerns," read the headline on Joe's morning paper. The photo showed Rebecca back in her corporate world. Power suit, perfect smile, not a hint of the woman who could spend hours adjusting valve clearances. "She's good at what she does," Joe commented, watching Marcus study the article. "Both sides of who she is." The restoration photos spread across the workbench told their own story. Early shots showed individual work, Marcus alone with the car. Then Rebecca appeared in the background, then closer, then working alongside him. The progression was clear, natural, until it stopped abruptly 3 days ago. Tommy sorted through the images during his afternoon study break. "We should finish the photo series," he said. "Show how the story ends. Some stories don't get endings." "Kid," Marcus replied, but he was already thinking about the remaining work, the connections still waiting to be made. A local tech blog had pieced together Rebecca's morning routine, tracking her journey from her penthouse to Shaw Industries. headquarters. The article painted her time in Evans Avenue as a bizarre breakdown. The billionaire CEO slumming it with mechanics and homeless veterans. What they missed, what the photos showed, was the authenticity of every moment. Close-ups of hands working together on complex repairs, candid shots of shared concentration over technical challenges, the gradual transformation of both car and people. Emma brought Marcus his usual coffee, setting it beside a photo of Rebecca explaining engine timing to Tommy. "You know what I see in these pictures?" she asked. Two people who forgot to care about which world they came from. The afternoon brought unexpected visitors, Carl and other veterans who'd been following the restoration. They formed a protective circle around the car, their presence deterring the more aggressive reporters. "Some battles aren't fought with weapons," Carl said, positioning his chair for maximum visibility. "Sometimes it's about standing guard over what matters." Marcus continued working, the camera capturing each step. The Mustang's revival had become a symbol of something larger, about authenticity, about bridging worlds, about the courage to be fully yourself. A business magazine ran a profile questioning Rebecca's fitness to lead, citing her erratic behavior and inappropriate associations. The article missed the irony that Shaw Industries' latest autonomous driving system, the one receiving rave reviews, had been improved by insights Rebecca gained working on classic car mechanics. The restoration photos didn't show that part. The corporate success, the technical innovations. They showed grease-stained hands sharing tools, shared smiles over successful repairs, the gradual building of trust through shared purpose. "Found something you should see," Tommy announced late in the day, holding up his phone. It was a different article from a small tech blog. Shaw Industries CEO demonstrates hands-on engineering excellence. The piece praised Rebecca's deep technical knowledge, suggesting her recent activities showed a commitment to understanding mechanics at every level. The writer had done their homework, tracking down military records of Marcus's service as a master mechanic, noting the precision of the restoration work. It painted a different picture, not of scandal, but of expertise crossing social boundaries. Marcus added the article's screenshot to the collection of photos. The story they told was still unfinished, like the Mustang itself, caught between transformation and completion, between what was and what could be. As evening fell, he packed away the photos carefully, leaving space for ones not yet taken. Through the gathering darkness, the Mustang's partially restored form stood as testament to work interrupted but not abandoned, to connections paused but not broken. The letter arrived with the morning sun, hand-delivered by Joe, who'd found it propped against the Mustang's windshield. The paper was simple this time, a lined sheet torn from a notebook, not corporate stationery. Rebecca's handwriting flowed. Across the page, less controlled than her usual precise script. "Marcus, some people think I'm fixing a car to escape my life. They don't understand I'm fixing a car to find it again. Dad used to say that every repair is a chance to make something better than it was before, not just restored, but improved. Maybe that's true for people too. The board meetings, the press conferences, the constant scrutiny, that's part of who I am now. But so is the grease under my nails and the satisfaction of a perfect valve adjustment. I'm tired of choosing between worlds when I finally found someone who understands both. Meet me at the garage behind 1879 Mason Street. It's where Dad and I used to work on the Mustang. Some bridges need to be built in private before they can stand in public." Marcus read the letter twice, feeling the honesty in the hurried penmanship, the small smudge of oil at the corner that proved it had been written in a moment of raw truth. "Well," Joe prompted, trying and failing to hide his investment in the outcome. "She's right about bridges," Marcus said, carefully folding the letter, "and about repairs." The address led him to an industrial area away from downtown's gleaming towers. The garage was unmarked but well maintained, its weathered exterior hiding a fully equipped workshop. Rebecca waited inside, dressed in work clothes, her corporate mask nowhere in sight. "This was Dad's sanctuary," she said by way of greeting. "His escape from board meetings and balance sheets. Now it's mine." The space told its own story. High-end tools organized with military precision, classic car manuals sharing shelf space with technical journals, a wall of photos showing father and daughter through years of shared projects. "The press is calling. It a breakdown," Rebecca continued, running her hand along a workbench. "The brilliant CEO getting her hands dirty with commoners. But they don't see what you see. What do I see? That some people are like these old engines, most authentic when all the parts are allowed to work together." She met his eyes. "I won't apologize for either world. The company does good work. Our safety systems save lives. But this," she gestured around the garage, "this saves me." Marcus understood. His years in the military had taught him that leadership sometimes meant straddling worlds, understanding both the trenches and the strategy room. "Your father," he said carefully, "he managed both." Until the end, Rebecca's voice softened. "He never lost touch with what was real. The day he died, he'd been in board meetings all morning, but his hands had engine grease under the nails." She smiled at the memory. The investors hated it. The engineers loved him for it. They spent the next hour talking about the Mustang's remaining repairs, about balance and authenticity, about bridges between worlds. The letter sat on the workbench between them, its honest words a foundation for understanding. "The community misses you," Marcus said finally. "Tommy keeps asking when you'll be back to explain combustion cycles. The board wants me to maintain a more appropriate image." She made air quotes with grease-stained fingers. "I told them that authenticity is the most appropriate image a tech company can have. Then I showed them our latest safety ratings. And I'm done hiding." She picked up the letter, now smudged with fresh oil stains. "Dad built this company by understanding both the engineering and the business. I can't be less than he taught me to be." Outside, the city hummed with morning traffic. Somewhere, reporters still searched for scandal, and board members fretted about image. But in the sanctuary of the garage, two people from different worlds found common ground in the honest work of rebuilding. Engines, bridges, trust. "So," Rebecca said, pulling out the Mustang specifications, "ready to figure out how to make this work? All of it?" Marcus looked at the letter, at the woman who'd written it, at the world of possibilities contained in a simple invitation to build bridges. That's what mechanics do, isn't it? We figure out how to make all the parts work. Together. The project plans spread across Rebecca's workbench were a blend of two worlds, technical sketches mixed with business projections, restoration timelines alongside community impact assessments. In one corner, Marcus's precise mechanical drawings detailed the Mustang's final restoration phases. In another, Rebecca's corporate expertise mapped out something larger, a community technical training center. "Think about it," Rebecca said, highlighting a section of the plans. "Evans Avenue has the perfect combination of need and talent. We've already seen it with Tommy, with the veterans who stop by. People want to learn, to work with their hands." Marcus studied the drawings, where his restoration notes intersected with her business strategy. "Using classic car restoration as a teaching tool? Dad always said you can learn everything from an engine." She pointed to a detailed timeline. "The Mustang becomes the first project. We document every step, create a curriculum. Shaw Industries provides backing, tools, space, and legitimacy," Marcus added, understanding. "Corporate support means real opportunities, not just dreams." The plans showed a converted warehouse 2 blocks from Joe's store. The main floor was designed as a teaching garage, with classroom space above. A note in Rebecca's handwriting read, "Priority hiring local residents, veterans." Tommy burst in, his school backpack still on. "Joe said you were back. Are we working on the Mustang today?" He stopped short, seeing the plans. "What's all this?" Rebecca smiled. How would you like to be our first official student? As she explained the concept, Marcus watched Tommy's eyes grow wide. The boy's natural mechanical aptitude had been clear from day one. Now there was a path to develop it, to turn interest into opportunity. But first, Marcus said, we need to finish our current project. He pointed to his section of the plans, where detailed notes mapped out the Mustang's final restoration stages. The afternoon merged into evening as they refined the plans. Rebecca took business calls between helping Marcus outline teaching modules. Her corporate efficiency complemented his practical experience, creating something neither could have built alone. The board's actually excited, she said after one call. They see the PR value, but more importantly, they see the potential for developing hands-on engineering talent. Local news had picked up the story, but differently now. Tech CEO and veteran partner to create Community Training Center read one headline. The article featured a photo of Rebecca and Marcus working on the Mustang, both in their element, neither pretending to be anything but themselves. Emma brought dinner from the diner, studying the plans as they ate. About time. Someone saw the potential in this neighborhood, she said, though some of us saw it all along. She gave the Mustang a meaningful look. The car sat half in shadow, its restoration nearly complete. Like the project plans, it represented a bridge between worlds, classic engineering meeting modern purpose, past connecting to future. We'll need instructors, Marcus said, making notes. Carl's expertise with electronics, Mike's transmission knowledge. And you? Tommy asked. Will you teach too? Marcus looked at Rebecca, who had somehow managed to get engine grease on. Her business casual shirt while reviewing financial projections. She caught his eye and smiled. I think, he said carefully, we all have something to teach and learn. As night fell, they rolled up the plans carefully, but one page remained. On the workbench, a simple sketch of the Mustang, annotated in both their handwriting. At the bottom, Rebecca had written, some restorations restore more than just machines. Tommy left with a stack of basic engineering books Rebecca had ordered for him. The excitement in his step showed a future taking shape, possibilities opening. Like the garage doors at dawn. You know, Rebecca said, watching him go, when Dad died, I thought I had to choose between his worlds, the corporate offices or the garage floor. She touched the plans gently. I never considered building a bridge between them. Marcus understood. Sometimes the best restoration work wasn't about returning something to what it had been, but about helping it become what it was meant to be. The property deed lay on the hood of the nearly restored Mustang, its official letterhead stark against the gleaming paint. 1879-1885 Evans Avenue, read the address line, encompassing not just Joe's corner store, but the entire block, including the warehouse they'd been planning to convert. You bought the whole block? Marcus asked, looking up from the document. Rebecca stood by the Mustang's fender, one hand resting on the familiar curve of metal. I made them an offer that accounted for more than just property value. Community value matters too, she smiled. Besides, Joe gets to keep running his store. He just doesn't have to worry about rent anymore. The deed represented more than just a real estate transaction. It was a commitment to Evans Avenue, to the vision they'd built together, to the belief that different worlds could not just coexist, but strengthen each other. The board approved it as a corporate investment in workforce development. Rebecca continued, but we know it's more than that. Marcus ran his hand along the Mustang's restored quarter panel, remembering how it had looked when he first found it. The transformation wasn't just in the metal and paint, it was in all of them. Did I ever tell you about my last deployment? He asked quietly. We had this commander who understood both sides of leadership, the strategic planning and the hands-in-the-dirt work. He taught me that the best solutions come from bridging those worlds. Rebecca nodded, understanding, like Dad with the company. He never lost touch with actual engineering, even when he was running board meetings. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the garage windows. They'd moved the Mustang back to Rebecca's father's workshop for its final stages of restoration, the space now serving as a prototype for their larger vision. Tommy burst in after school as usual, but today he carried architectural drawings from his drafting class. "I designed some workstations for the training center," he announced proudly. "Made sure they'd work for people in wheelchairs too, like Mr. Carl." Rebecca studied the drawings with genuine interest. "This is excellent work. You've thought about workflow, accessibility." She looked at Marcus. "We should hire him as a student consultant." The property deed seemed to pulse with possibility. The plans they'd drawn up were becoming reality. Not just a training center, but a place where experience and opportunity could meet, where veterans could find purpose, where kids like Tommy could build futures. Shaw Industries' stock hit a new high today, Marcus noted, showing Rebecca a news alert on his phone. "Seems the market likes the idea of corporate responsibility with real impact." "The market," Rebecca said with a slight smile, "doesn't always understand what it likes. They see workforce development and positive PR. We see," she gestured around the garage, at Tommy working on his drawings, at the restored Mustang gleaming under workshop lights. "We see family," Marcus finished quietly. The word hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Family, not just by blood or circumstance, but by choice and understanding, by shared purpose. The property deed outlined strict terms. The land would always serve community education, would always prioritize local needs, would always bridge the gap between corporate resources and neighborhood wisdom. "There's something else," Rebecca said, pulling another document from her folder. "The garage, Dad's garage. I'm transferring half ownership to you." Marcus started to protest, but she held up a hand. "You understand both worlds now, just like he did, just like I'm learning to. This place needs that kind of leadership." The sun was setting when Joe stopped by, carrying his usual offering of coffee. He looked at the property deed, at the restored Mustang, at the future taking shape in Tommy's drawings. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "some people spend their whole lives in one world or another, but the real magic happens when someone's brave enough to build doors between them." Marcus and Rebecca shared a look, understanding the weight of the decision they were making. It wasn't just about property or programs or even purpose. It was about choosing to be fully who they were, together, in a way that could open doors for others. The Mustang stood as testament to what was possible, not just restored but renewed, ready to help write the next chapter of their story. The Mustang's keys caught the morning light, the fresh-cut metal bright against the original key fob that Robert Shaw had used for so many years. 2 sets lay side by side on the workbench, one worn with history, one new with promise. Dad always said a car needs 2 sets of keys. Rebecca remembered picking up the older set. One to remember where it came from, one to drive it toward its future. The garage was crowded with familiar faces. Joe had closed his store early, Emma had brought coffee and pastries for everyone, and Tommy proudly wore his new student apprentice badge. Carl and his veteran friends stood near the back, their presence a quiet affirmation of the journey. The Mustang gleamed under the workshop lights, its Highland green paint restored to a deep, liquid shine. Every component had been either restored or carefully upgraded, maintaining the car's original character while incorporating subtle improvements. Like its owners, it bridged past and present with graceful authenticity. "Want to do the honors?" Rebecca asked, holding out the new set of keys to Marcus. He took them carefully, feeling the weight of the moment. "Together," he said. "Some journeys need 2 drivers." They moved to the car, the small crowd falling silent in anticipation. The driver's door opened with the solid thunk of precise engineering. Marcus slid behind the wheel, Rebecca taking the passenger seat where she'd once sat, beside her father. The key slipped into the ignition like it had been waiting all these years for this moment. Marcus paused, his hand on the key, looking at Rebecca. "Ready?" She touched the dashboard where her father's initials were still faintly visible beneath. The restored finish. Dad would love this moment, not just the car, but what it's become part of. The engine turned over instantly, settling into the deep, confident idle of a perfectly tuned V8. The sound filled the garage, but it wasn't just mechanical perfection they were hearing. It was the culmination of a journey that had restored. More than just metal and chrome. Tommy pressed forward eagerly. "Can I hear the timing with the stethoscope again?" "Later," Marcus promised. "First, we have somewhere to be." The drive to Evans Avenue was a parade of sorts. The community had gathered to welcome the Mustang home, not just as a restored classic, but as a symbol of their shared future. The warehouse that would become their training center was festooned with banners, its newly painted doors open wide. They parked in front of Joe's store, where it had all begun. The gathered crowd included corporate board members in suits, mingling with local mechanics in work clothes, reporters who'd once sought scandal, now capturing a story of transformation. Rebecca stood to address them, comfortable now in both her roles. "My father taught me that true restoration isn't about returning something to what it was, but about helping it become what it was meant to be. This car, this community, this project, they're all part of that lesson." Marcus added, "And sometimes the things we think need fixing end up fixing us instead." The keys glinted in the sunlight as Rebecca handed them to Tommy. "Want to learn how to check the timing?" The boy's eyes widened. "Really?" "Really," Marcus confirmed. "Every great mechanic starts somewhere. This car will help teach a lot of people, just like it taught us." The crowd dispersed into the warehouse for the official tour of the future training center. But Rebecca and Marcus lingered by the Mustang. She took her father's old key fob, now attached to the new key, and ran her thumb over its worn surface. "You know what Dad would say about all this?" Marcus smiled. "That some restorations take a whole community? That, and that every great journey needs the right co-pilot." She took his hand, their fingers interlacing naturally, comfortably, like matching parts finally finding their proper alignment. The new business card was nothing like the torn corporate one that had marked their moment of crisis. This one was understated but elegant, featuring a simple embossed silhouette of a classic Mustang above the text, "Evans Avenue Technical Training." Center and below it, Marcus Turner and Rebecca Shaw, co-directors. "What do you think?" Rebecca asked, setting the card on the Mustang's polished hood. The morning sun streamed through the training center's windows, highlighting the busy workshop floor where Tommy was leading a group of fellow students through a basic engine diagnosis. "I think it's missing something," Marcus replied, pulling out a pen. Below their titles, he added in precise handwriting, "Because everyone deserves a restoration." The training center had been open for 3 months now, and every day brought new stories of transformation. Veterans finding purpose in teaching, automotive electronics, neighborhood kids discovering the satisfaction of skilled work, local mechanics sharing generations of knowledge. The Mustang held pride of place in the center of the main floor, its restoration journey documented in photos and videos that lined the walls. But it wasn't just a showpiece. Every week, different components were carefully removed and reinstalled. As teaching tools, the car becoming a living classroom. "Mr. Marcus," Tommy called out, "think we found the misfire in Mr. Johnson's Chevy. Want to verify our diagnosis?" Marcus shared a smile with Rebecca before heading over. They'd learned to balance their roles. Her corporate expertise keeping the center funded and growing, his practical experience ensuring the training remained grounded in real-world skills. Like the Mustang's engine, each part complemented the other. Rebecca watched him work with the students, then turned to address a group of corporate visitors. She no longer felt the need to hide her grease-stained hands or change clothes between worlds. The center's success had proven that authenticity was its own kind of professional asset. "The results speak for themselves," she told the visitors, gesturing to the workshop floor. 92% job placement rate, 3 new satellite locations opening next quarter, and most importantly, real changes in real lives. The corporate delegation included several board members who'd once questioned her judgment. Now they nodded approvingly, seeing the perfect alignment of social impact and business success. One of them picked up the new business card, studying the added handwritten line. Restoration, he mused. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not just cars. Everything deserves a second chance, Rebecca agreed, watching Marcus guide Tommy through a precise diagnostic procedure. Sometimes it just takes the right people believing in the possibility. The afternoon brought a familiar face, the journalist who'd first covered their story in the Evans Avenue Chronicle. She was working for a national publication now, but had returned to write about the center's success. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked, gesturing to the busy workshop, the engaged students, the restored Mustang that had started it all. Marcus and Rebecca exchanged glances. How could they explain that the real restoration hadn't been about the car at all? It had been about two people from different worlds finding the courage to be their authentic selves, about a community discovering its potential, about love that grew from shared purpose and understanding. As the day wound down, they sat in the Mustang together, the new business card propped on the dash beside the old photo of Rebecca and her father. Through the windshield, they could see Tommy locking up, pride evident in his responsible handling. "Of the keys, Dad would love this," Rebecca said softly. "Not just the car, but everything it led to, everyone it brought together." Marcus took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of partners who'd found their perfect match. "You know what I think he'd love most? Seeing you finally at home in both your worlds." The setting sun painted the workshop in shades of gold, catching the Mustang's paint and making it glow like a beacon. Outside, Evans Avenue hummed with purpose. Joe's store doing brisk business, Emma's diner packed with students and teachers, Carl teaching a veterans group about electrical systems. Rebecca picked up the new business card, running her finger over the added line. "Because everyone deserves a restoration," she read. "Even two people who didn't know they were looking for one? Especially them." Marcus smiled, starting the engine. Its purr was perfect, like everything else about this moment. They drove home together in the gathering dusk, the Mustang carrying them smoothly toward their shared future. Behind them, the training center stood as testament to what was possible when people dared to bridge different worlds, when restoration meant not just fixing what was broken, but building something new and beautiful from the pieces of the past. And on the dash, the new business card caught the last light of day, its simple message a promise to everyone who would follow their path. Here was a place where restoration meant rediscovery, where broken things found new purpose, and where love could build bridges strong enough to carry any dream.